Welcome back. In the spirit of Halloween, has social media become a monster no one can control? In the last week, our country has been horrified by a series of bombs sent to prominent Democrats and an attack on a Pittsburgh synagogue. And federal investigators say the suspects in both incidents were essentially radicalized on social media. So is social media to blame for the attacks? No. But consider this. NBC News posted this report that researchers are warning of a rise in attacks on Jewish people on social media. And we posted it at 9:53 a.m. on Eastern Time last Saturday, 1 minute before the first 911 call came in about a shooting in a Pittsburgh synagogue. And it's not just content that's sounding alarms, it's also deceptive ads and even deception about who's paying for them. Vice News says it posed as all 100 senators to run ads on Facebook, and Facebook approved all of them. Vice's investigation found that the social media giants paid for by disclosure you see on top of every ad can be easily manipulated. Fake ads, fake buyers, hate-filled rumors and conspiracies. It's all part of the many-headed monster of social media these days, and it's all there to make money for Facebook and Twitter. With me now, Jonathan Albright, Research Director at the Tow Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University. He tracks and studies internet trolls and hate speech on social media. His warning about anti-Semitic material posted on Instagram was included in that NBC News report. So, Jonathan, I mean, it's spooky, to borrow a Halloween word today, that, the report goes out, we're interviewing about it, and there it is. There's the connective tissue.
I didn't know it was 1 minute. That's news to me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was about half an hour, or roughly half an hour before that went out, and the timing is uncanny on that.
You know, it's interesting. I want to start with sort of Soros and the fact that the George Soros mythology. I don't know what else to call it, but there's just this been mythology on the right, and social media. It started really in about 2004 because George Soros was a funder of a big liberal group. And when social media took Soros from it, Soros is in charge of everything if you go on in the internet. You've done a lot of studying of this.
Yeah, so I think that when you have characters that are involved politically and run, $18 billion foundations across the world, I think that it gives you a good backstory and it gives you a lot of fuel to build out other conspiracies that are politically related, and especially ones that might influence or tend to affect voting in an election or to start a controversy like the one we've seen with the Soros-funded caravan.
Well, here's what I don't understand. You find this stuff pretty easy. We have found this stuff pretty easy. I saw another journalist say, he did a few keyword searches and found all of these threats. Why do the social media companies pretend they're paralyzed on all of this?
I think it's to be fair to them. I think the challenge is enormous. So and a lot of the detection of these types of things is done through automated means. So
which is the problem.
You just can't hire a million people.
So AI doesn't work.
Well, I think
this instance,
it works to a point, and they also rely, on community flagging. Mm-hmm. So users flagging content that they find offensive.
Like when people file a complaint to Twitter to say a person named Cesar Sayoc is harassing them and threatening their lives? The system didn't work here badly for Twitter.
I think the detection system for that was a good example of it not working.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, and I think that it's not just social media. Not to take it outside of social media, but these things travel between all different channels. They jump from social media, they jump into the mainstream media. So it's a very big problem to try to contain in terms of damage control or collateral damage. And then you have certain leaders also piggybacking on top of these other messages, which causes further, I think, damage and controversy.
Kara, I'm curious what you think of what Kara Swisher wrote today in her New York Times column, because I have to tell you, I don't think Kara Swisher ever would have thought she would have written this even 6 months ago. She goes, social media platforms and Facebook and Twitter are as guilty of this as Gab are designed so that the awful travels twice as fast as the good, and they are operating with sloppy disregard of the consequences of that awful speech, leading to disasters that they then have to clean up after. And her thing was essentially titled, it was just, I thought the web would stop hate, and instead it's even to spread it faster.
Well, so I think that it gives it legitimacy and it gives it attention, and that leads just the exposure and the repetition of terms. People tend to remember things even during fact checks and correcting this misinformation or correcting the disinformation. People tend to remember the the nature of the keywords or the charged keywords that lead to some of the actions that people have taken into their own hands. So they tend to remember Soros and funding and Caravan. They don't remember that, this fact check says it disproves that.
I had a voter, I was talking to a voter last week, he says, I heard something of a Massachusetts senator and Soros on the Caravan. And I'm thinking, where? There's no way you did, but they sort of connected three things in their head. That's what they believed.
Absolutely. So the last thing that Cesar Sayoc had on one of his public Facebook pages, so the last of his public post, was a Hillary Clinton message, and the most recent tweet that he had on he had multiple Twitter accounts, but was a George Soros meme. So I think that the prevalence, just the nature of these things being all over people who have taken kind of vigilante action and taken things into their own hands and caused quite a bit of harm to other people shows that there is a relationship between content posted on social media, often going through mainstream sources and broadcasts. So I think that there's a relationship that we need to understand a little bit more, and it does seed, and it is seeded, and it does start on social media. But we need to understand the kind of larger nature of the ecosystem and how.
What is it that we need to understand? It goes from social media to talk radio to Fox primetime.
Well,
I mean, it's not a hard direct line.
But it takes thinking more holistically, and it takes thinking about putting the larger pieces together rather than looking at just Twitter or just Facebook or just Instagram or even just Gab for that case.
What should professional journalists be doing here? I mean, this is the hard part here. It's like, we struggle with this. So, on one hand, Soros is used as a cudgel in paid political advertising. Our job is to cover the campaign. But when you cover sort of one of these attacks, you also are helping to spread misinformation about somebody.
Absolutely. So this gets into just the idea of being cautious and being cognizant to not re-promote or give it even more attention. So sometimes it's technical things. It's don't post links to sites like InfoWars, or don't post links when you're correcting things, because it often will give attribution from your domain, such as NBC.com, to this random
This is
blog.
the case where Sunshine doesn't work. Sunshine actually can sometimes backfire on you.
Absolutely. So I think that there needs to be a new process in journalism and a new understanding and possibly a new creed for journalism to tackle these issues, to not amplify things more than they already are by trying to correct or by trying to inform, which is really the key mission of journalism.
And obviously, they're the actual elected officials who actually need to tone it down. That's something you and I can't do anything about.
Yes.
Jonathan Albright, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.